It had rained the morning they buried Thomas. Not a downpour, not a violent storm, just a slow, steady curtain of gray that seemed to seep into the bones of the earth. The kind of rain that settled and stayed, curling around stones, soaking graves, and echoing in the silence left behind. Elena hadn't cried, not because she felt no grief, but because her sorrow ran too deep for tears. She stood at the edge of the churchyard, her shawl soaked through, her hands clenched in fists so tight the thread-thin cuts in her palms had reopened. She said nothing. She watched the earth swallow the only men who had ever warmed her nights, and then she walked home alone. The cottage felt larger without him, as if his presence had always filled the corners. Now every chair seemed too wide, the bed too cold, the fire too dim. She lit a candle and sat at the worn wooden table where he used to read aloud to her in the evenings. The candle flickered and cast her shadow against the wall. She threaded her needle. Work had always been her refuge. Before Thomas, during Thomas, and now after him. Her fingers moved as if summoned by some muscle memory older than her grief. She stitched for the village, the mayor's wife, the innkeeper's daughter, even the priest's aging sister, but coin came slow and uneven, and in whispers, they said she brought bad luck. Some said her womb was cursed for being childless. Others believed she'd taken her husband's soul to keep herself company in the nights. No one knew the truth, that he had simply coughed and bled until he didn't wake up. Still, the Duke of Elfston sent his footman every month. Fine garments, velvet-lined cloaks, ceremonial sashes, all wrapped in parchment and tied with crimson silk. She repaired tears with careful hands, matched gold thread like an artist restoring a faded painting. The pay was generous, but more than that, it was consistent. The Duke never spoke to her. Only the footman, stiff and silent, standing at the door with gloved hands and downturned eyes. Until one dusk, he came himself. She didn't hear horses. No guards. Just a knock, sharp and certain. When she opened the door, the evening wind rushed in first, cold and scented with pine. Then came the man, tall, dark-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a wool cloak marked by the sigil of Elfston. His eyes were blue, startlingly so, like ice that had once known warmth. "You stitched this," he said, lifting the edge of his cloak to reveal the seam. She blinked. "Your Grace." "It has not torn since," he said. Her hands were still damp from washing, and she quickly dried them on her apron. "I do my work with care." His gaze didn't leave her. "That much is clear." A silence followed, not awkward, but dense, like the air before thunder. She looked down. "Would you like me to prepare tea?" "No," he said, softly. "No, I won't stay." And yet he lingered another heartbeat. His eyes moved around the cottage, its low beams, the stone hearth, the modest shelves filled with jars of thread and scraps of fabric. A place shaped by labor, not leisure. His expression did not carry judgment, only a quiet curiosity. Or was it recognition? "It is a good home," he murmured. She nodded. It was. When he left, she stood in the doorway long after his footsteps vanished into the trees. She didn't understand why her heart had quickened. It was only a visit. A nobleman inspecting a craftsman's work. Nothing more. The next morning, a letter came sealed in royal wax. Elena of Blackthorn Vale. His Grace, the Duke of Elfston, requests your presence at Elfston Manor for a matter of personal commission. Carriage will arrive at first light. It was signed by the steward's hand, but the ink smelled of cloves, like the coat the Duke had worn. She nearly burned it. She nearly tore it into pieces and cast them into the stove. But something deep within her chest, some ache that hadn't stirred since Thomas passed, kept her still. At dawn, she washed her face, pinned her hair with the last of her mother's combs, and stepped into the carriage with nothing but her sewing bag and the echo of silence in her bones. The road twisted through forests that seemed older than memory. Mist clung to the branches, and crows flitted from tree to tree, their cries sharp and distant. By the time the manor appeared on the hilltop, the sun had risen behind the clouds, casting the castle in pale gray light. Elfston Manor was not warm. Its stone walls reached high into the sky, and its towers seemed to mourn the time when kings walked its halls. But inside, the air was fragrant with sandalwood and burning logs, and tapestries lined the corridors like forgotten prayers. She was guided to the west wing. There, in a sitting room lit by a dozen candles, he waited. He stood by the fire, not in regal posture, but in thought, his eyes on the flames as if seeking some forgotten memory within them. When she entered, he turned, and something shifted in his face. A softness, brief and unspoken. "You came," he said. "You summoned me." "Yes," he said. "But you could have refused." Elena tilted her chin. "Perhaps I should have." He smiled faintly. "Then I'm grateful you did not." He gestured to a chair near the hearth. She remained standing. "I'm not here for your needle," he said. Her brow furrowed. "Then why?" He stepped closer, slowly, like a man approaching a frightened bird. His voice lowered, nearly a whisper. "Because I've known loneliness too long. And I think you have, too." Her breath caught. She tried to speak, but no words came. He continued, eyes locked to hers. "This house is filled with relics and ghosts. The nobility wishes I remarry, to forge alliances, to birth heirs. But I want something different. Something quieter. Something honest." "You don't even know me," she said, voice trembling. "I know grief when I see it," he answered. "And I know how beautifully you've stitched every broken thread handed to you." He reached out, not to touch, but to offer. "Elena, your pockets are empty, and my bed is lonely." She felt the air leave her lungs. Not from offense, not from shame, but from the weight of the truth behind his words. A truth she hadn't dared name in years. He wasn't offering sin. He wasn't offering pity. He was offering the rawest kind of companionship. She looked away. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. "I so to live," she whispered. He nodded. "Then live here. On your terms." She shook her head. "The court will talk. The village will curse." He stepped back, but his voice was resolute. "Let them. They've done so before." Silence filled the room once more. And then, softly, she spoke. "If I say yes, I will not be hidden." He looked her in the eyes, the flame light dancing in the blue depths. "You will be seen by every soul in this kingdom." She left without another word, heart pounding so loud she thought it would burst. She didn't answer him that night. But the next evening, her sewing kit arrived in the east wing of the manor. And so did she. The carriage wheels clattered over the frost-laced stones as dawn broke through a veil of mist. Elena kept her eyes on the fogged window, her fingers tight around the worn leather of her sewing bag. Each breath she drew felt too shallow, too fragile, as if the moment she exhaled, the courage would leave her. When the gates of Elfstone Manor groaned open, the sun hit the towers like an old hymn returning to forgotten ears. The estate looked less like a home and more like a memory frozen in stone. The spires, rimmed in gold leaf and gray with age, pierced the sky with silent dignity. Ivy curled like veins across the marble, as if nature itself clung to what nobility refused to abandon. 2 guards waited at the entrance. They did not bow. One of them frowned at her apron. The other looked away, as if her presence stained the morning air. She walked beneath the carved archway with her spine straight. The hem of her black skirt brushed polished floors where queens once paced, her boots too loud for the silence of old wealth. Every glance from passing servants was a reminder, she didn't belong. A seamstress belonged in a back alley or a village stall, not among oil paintings and candelabras worth more than her husband's grave. The steward led her through long corridors and into the west wing, where the air was warmer, tinged with spice and old parchment. The room they entered had tall windows curtained in crimson velvet. Candles burned in brass sconces along the walls. A fire cracked in a hearth so wide a man could sleep in it. He was there, sitting beside the flames, hands clasped, his posture still as a statue yet pulsing with life. The Duke turned only when the door shut behind her. She did not curtsy. "You are not here for mending," she said, her voice neither soft nor defiant, just honest. His eyes, dark with some unknowable depth, didn't waver. "No. I am not." Her fingers curled tighter around her bag. "Then say what you intend." "I am not for sale." He stood slowly, like a man rising from a long ache in his bones. The firelight caught the edge of the crest stitched into his coat, 2 hounds, a crown, and a broken sword. There were medals on his chest, dulled from disuse, and the faintest tremble in his jaw as he approached. No, he said. I never thought you were. She stared up at him, this man draped in silk and silence. His voice did not carry arrogance. It carried weight. Like the final toll of a bell. I've buried love, he said. My wife died 3 winters ago. An infection. She slipped from my arms before I could say goodbye. Elena lowered her gaze. And you've buried yours, he added. Not just in the earth, but in the years since. A breath hitched in her chest. He hadn't asked her name. But he knew her story. Your nights are long, he said, softer now. Mine too. I sit awake until the candles die. I reach across empty sheets and find only cold. I drink not to forget, but to feel something again. And still I hear her laughter in this hall. She said nothing, only watched the fire flicker in the iron grate. The cord is pressing, he continued. They whisper of legacy and heirs. They push noble names like dice on a table. But I'm not a man who plays with hearts. He stepped closer. I do not want a duchess to parade beside me. I want someone who knows the ache of silence. Who threads grief into every stitch, but still chooses to sew. Someone who sees me not as title or coin, but as a man trying not to fall apart. Her throat tightened. Why me? His reply came like a hush before a storm. Because your pockets are empty, and my bed is lonely. It wasn't indecent. It wasn't seductive. It was raw. As if the words had been carved from his ribs and offered without defense. Still, Elena's instinct recoiled. You mistake loneliness for affection. I don't need your pity. I earn my keep. I live by my hands, not by the mercy of nobility. I know, he said, and there was something like awe in his voice. That's why I came to you. Because you are not afraid of hunger or death or whispers. You've endured storms I've never dared face. And yet you still rise. He turned from her then, back to the fire. I ask nothing of you. No title. No ring. Only your presence. Only your voice, so the wind doesn't echo so cruelly through these halls. She stepped back toward the door, heart pounding. The flames cast his shadow tall and solitary across the floor. I so to live, your grace, she said, voice trembling. Then live here, he answered, still not turning. Not as my mistress. He faced her now, and the intensity in his eyes nearly broke her resolve. But as my ruin. She froze. He walked closer again, until only inches remained between them. Let the court mock me. Let them say I've been cursed by a widow's kiss. I would rather burn in scandal than sleep another night alone. Her breath came shallow. You don't even know what I've lost, she said. He nodded. Then tell me. Every thread. Every scar. I'll learn it all if you'll let me. A long silence passed between them, thick with hesitation, fear, yearning. I have nothing, she whispered. He lifted a hand slowly, hesitating before brushing her sleeve, barely a touch. Neither do I. Only ghosts. Tears welled behind her eyes. Not the sobbing kind. The silent kind. The kind that burn as they wait to fall. I don't want to be a secret, she said, almost inaudibly. You won't be, he swore. You'll be the scandal of the century. The corner of her mouth twitched, half a smile, half a dare. I'll be mocked. I'll be dethroned, he said, softly. But you'll be the only truth I've ever known. She turned then, pulling open the heavy door. She didn't look back. But the next morning, her sewing kit sat beside the fireplace in the west wing. And beside it, a single rose, white as winter, blooming in defiance of the frost. The east wing smelled like silence. Not abandonment, no, it was too elegant for that. But there was a stillness to the place, like breath held for years. Dust gathered only where the light refused to touch. The windows, tall and arched, bore frost along the edges like white lace, and each time Elena stepped into the corridor, the floor gave a soft creak, as if remembering someone else's footsteps. She unpacked little. A satchel of needles, some folded fabric, 2 dresses, one black, one pale lavender, and a photograph of Thomas she no longer dared look at too long. The steward had shown her the room without ceremony, muttering something about his Grace's orders before vanishing down the hall. No welcome. No warmth. Just the weight of whispers pressed against every wall. Still, the linen was clean. The hearth was lit each evening before she arrived. And the pillows smelled faintly of lavender and frost, the same scent worn by ghosts. She worked during the day, stitching ceremonial gowns, altering hems for noble women whose hands never touched thread, whose mouths always found time to spit her name into gossip. The Duke's widow in waiting, they scoffed. The coal miner's wife who thinks herself a duchess. One even asked her, while Elena knelt at her feet pinning lace, if it were true she'd lost a baby in the mines, or simply couldn't bear one at all. Elena didn't answer. She pricked the fabric, not the skin, and kept sewing. At night, the halls changed. The laughter of the day faded into low candlelight and long shadows. She would return to her room to find small things left behind, a candle still flickering outside her door, a hand-copied poem tucked beside the sewing kit, a novel resting on her windowsill open to a page about quiet love and firelight. And then, one night, she found him. She'd left her window open to the snow. The curtains fluttered like breath, and when she stepped into the room, he was there, sitting on the edge of her bed, still dressed in his formal coat, his hair damp from the cold. He didn't startle when she entered. Just looked down at her hands, bathed in the pale moonlight coming through the glass. "I can't sleep," he whispered. "Not unless you speak." She should have sent him away. She should have closed the door and burned the memory before it took root. But she didn't. She sat beside him and told him of Thomas. How he used to bring her wildflowers even after his fingers had turned black from mine soot. How he would hum lullabies to the child they never had. How, near the end, he begged her not to hold his hand because he didn't want her to feel how cold he'd already become. The Duke didn't interrupt. He just listened, like a man starving for something deeper than desire. His eyes didn't drift to her lips, nor her collarbone, but stayed fixed to her face, as if memorizing each crack in the surface. That night, they didn't kiss. They didn't touch. They just sat there, two souls with ragged seams, and let the cold pass between them like a confession. Other nights, they danced. Not in ballrooms, not beneath chandeliers or before watchful eyes. But barefoot, in the north gallery where statues of long-dead ancestors stood broken and moss-bitten, and the windows opened to nothing but stars. No music played. Only the hush of wind outside and the distant creak of old wood. He took her hand as if it were sacred. Her dress twirled like fog. His palm was rough with old scars, and when he pulled her close, his breath trembled against her neck. She wasn't sure if she was dancing or dreaming. And for a while, that was enough. But winter bred tongues sharper than ice. "The Duke has gone mad," they said. "He's bedding a peasant in his dead wife's wing. She poisoned her last husband. Will she do it again? She can't bear children. She'll leave the line empty." Elena stopped attending the servants' gatherings. She ate alone in her chamber. She dressed in darker gowns, even when the Duke requested color. She began locking the door at night. Not out of fear, but to protect him. Because she was no fool. She knew how kingdoms operated. She saw the looks from the chamberlain, the stares from the dowager countess. She heard the rustle of parchment behind closed doors, the drawing up of betrothal contracts, the whispers of alliances with noble daughters far more suited to a crown than a coal miner's widow. And yet, he still came. On the night of the winter ball, Elena didn't attend. She sat at the arched window of her chamber, watching snow fall over the courtyard in silent spirals. The sound of carriages and music drifted faintly through the walls. Her fingers curled into her lap, and she told herself she was content not to be chosen. But then the door opened. He entered without a word, still dressed in his ceremonial coat, dark sapphire, embroidered in silver thread, a jeweled crest shining at his chest. "They think you bewitched me," he murmured, walking toward her. She didn't turn. "Perhaps I did." He moved behind her, the fire from the hall casting both their reflections into the windowpane. "They say I've disgraced the title," he continued. "That I should have left you in the village where grief makes women silent and invisible." Her shoulders tightened. "Then leave me there. Let them win." He stepped closer. She felt his breath behind her ear. "I only began breathing again the night you told me your pain." Her eyes blurred with sudden tears. Then why, she whispered, do I feel like a secret? He turned her gently, pressing her hand against his chest, where his heart beat wild beneath layers of silk and shame. Because to love you openly would cost me everything, he said, voice cracking. But to lose you would cost me more. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She fell into him, not as a duchess, not as a mistress, not as a seamstress, but as a woman who had finally been seen. And outside, the snow kept falling. Quiet. Relentless. Like love that defies the silence it was born into. Spring came with a cruelty that caught her breath. It crept into the cracks of her windowpane with golden light and filled the trees with blossoms that seemed to mock the emptiness in her chest. Birds returned to the gardens of Elfston, singing as if they had never witnessed grief. The frost melted. The servants smiled again. But in the east wing, where no one lingered long, silence bloomed heavier than any rose. She found the letter on a Thursday. It was folded neatly beneath her sewing kit, black wax sealing it, no name, no greeting. Just a single page. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate, as if each letter had been etched by a blade rather than a pen. Asterisk, the Duke is to marry Lady Annalise of Brindale. An alliance of lands. A necessity of throne. You were a thread, beautiful, but temporary, asterisk. The words didn't wound. Not at first. They simply echoed. Over and over. A thread. Temporary. She sat in stillness for what could have been minutes or hours. Then, slowly, she stood and walked to the closet. She opened the wooden doors and stared at the gown she had spent weeks sewing, a bridal dress, cream and gold, stitched with delicate forget-me-nots along the sleeves. The bodice had taken her 3 days alone. She had never sewn it for herself. She had never dared. Until him. Without weeping, without rage, she placed it carefully over the back of the chair. A quiet offering. A burial. Then she packed a small case. 1 dress. 2 pins. Her mother's comb. No letters. No trace. She left the east wing before dawn, while the maids were still snoring and the corridors still heavy with sleep. She didn't look back. The lower town smelled of bread, smoke, and horses. Its streets were uneven, its people brisk. But it welcomed her without questions. She found a room above a baker's shop where the heat from the ovens warmed the floorboards and the scent of cinnamon clung to her sleeves. The window overlooked a crooked alley where children played with wooden hoops and old men spat tobacco into the gutters. She stitched again. Not gowns of velvet, but work skirts, aprons, sleeves torn from labor. Her fingers moved slower now. Her needle wavered more. She no longer mended with hope. Only to survive. Customers didn't know her name. The baker's wife called her Elle and paid her with coin and scraps. It was enough. Enough to keep the candle lit. Enough to quiet the ache. Almost. 2 months passed. And then came the knock. She had just finished repairing a torn hem when the door rattled beneath the weight of wind. Rain pelted the glass. Thunder murmured somewhere far off. She didn't expect anyone, not this late, not in this weather. Still, she opened the door. He stood there, soaked through. No crest. No guards. No ceremonial cloak. Just the Duke, drenched to the bone, eyes hollow, breath uneven, holding nothing but rain and regret. She froze. Her voice came without invitation. You lied to me. He didn't speak. Just stepped inside, dripping water across the wooden floor, his boots heavy with mud. Then, as if his bones failed him, he dropped to his knees before her. I broke it, he rasped. The betrothal. The arrangement. The court disowns me now. She stood rigid. And I was just a thread. His hands trembled. They forged that letter. The Chamberlain. My mother. They feared your name would stain the crown. They thought I would choose the kingdom. And did you? His eyes met hers, and something in them cracked. I would rather be a lord of ashes than a king without you. She didn't move. Couldn't. I searched every corner of the village, he continued. Every inn. Every stall. Every shop with candlelight behind the glass. I asked a beggar if he'd seen a woman with coal-black hair and eyes like winter fog. His chest rose and fell like a man drowning in air. I couldn't breathe, he whispered. Not without you beside me. Her hands, once so steady with thread, now curled into fists. Why? He stood now, reaching into his coat, pulling something wrapped in linen. He unfolded it slowly, reverently, revealing the gown she had left behind. The bridal dress. It's not a symbol, he said. It's a promise I never had the courage to keep, until now. Tears blurred her sight, but none fell. Her throat burned. I want no throne, he said. No heirs. No banners or alliances. Only you. Only a vow between two broken things who chose each other. She stared at the dress. It's ruined, she murmured. No, he said, voice softening. It was waiting. Something inside her cracked, not like glass, but like ice in spring. She stepped toward him. Slowly. Carefully. And when he opened his arms, she didn't hesitate. She buried her face in his chest, her tears staining the linen of his shirt, her sobs muffled by the heartbeat she'd once fallen asleep to in secret. Not because it was a fairy tale. But because it wasn't. Because it was jagged, bruised, flawed, and utterly real. That night, they didn't return to the manor. He stayed in her narrow bed beneath sloped ceilings, the smell of yeast and wood smoke lingering in the air. The rain sang against the glass like lullabies, and she lay with her head on his chest, his hand tangled in her hair. The candles flickered low. The world narrowed to breath and warmth. And in the hush of midnight, he whispered into her crown. Your pockets are still empty. But my bed is finally full. And this time, they slept. Together.